So thank you everyone for coming here. This is a building we're very proud of. It's a bit different for those of you who've been to Deloitte and haven't come to our Berkeley building here before. And it houses lots of wonderful and innovation things that we're doing within Deloitte. Today is I hope you'll find a really interesting set of conversations around innovation, but in a particular way with the M&A lens. So how are businesses using M&A to facilitate rapid transformation of their businesses? It's something we've been keeping an eye on for a couple of years now. There are lots of examples of it, but probably the easiest way to think about that in your head is a statistic we monitor around the proportion of technology businesses that are being acquired by non-technology businesses. So 3-4 years ago, by and large, it was other technology businesses acquiring the peers and equivalents. And just last year, we just got the data through the other day, and it's nearly 60% of technology businesses are now acquired by non-technology businesses. Now, technology is not the only part of innovation, and Sheelan Patel will point that out later on when we talk about some of the stuff that he's doing with Distill Ventures at Diageo. But it is just a good yardstick of the I think probably the convergence that's being triggered by innovation, much more so than we've ever seen before. And that can be through large-scale disruption, that can be through small kind of bolt-on activities, and then also that can be as a defensive response. So I think we were talking outside, one or two people, about Amazon, and you could argue that several transactions out there are in response to that. You could argue that the likes of 21st Century Fox is partly a response to the looming threats of the likes of Netflix and everything else. So lots of reason to be looking through innovation and disruption through the lens of M&A. And I am delighted to be able to welcome two fantastic speakers this evening to talk us through that with their perspectives. Uri Levine, who was the founder and originator of Waze, is probably the most famous application of that. And if you haven't got that on your phone, and I have to say, I'm finding it increasingly difficult to find anybody who doesn't have it on their phone, and if they haven't got it on their phone, they're probably living in the wrong century. So it is just the most fantastic app, and Uri will talk about a whole series of other things that are coming up, which are probably going to also transform our lives. And then later on, Sheelan Patel, who leads the Distill Ventures unit for Diageo, will talk about some of the fantastic innovation they have been doing that he's been leading for them. So with that, I will pass over to Uri, and then we'll move through the day.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I look at the audience and I see that you have uncomfortable chairs, and then they lock the gate behind you, so there's no way that you can escape from here, and there is no way that you can fall asleep because you'll drop off the chair, so this is not going to be a good idea. Hopefully I will try to make it useful and interesting this afternoon. And in general, I will be speaking about disruption, but you mentioned Waze, and I would like to tell a couple of stories about Waze, and this is very, very interesting. And then just a little bit, the point of view of an entrepreneur, and then we'll discuss disruption. So, with Waze, a lot of people over the time would come to me and say, thank you for Waze, you saved me from nightmare traffic jams, or I owe you a lot of money because of all the speeding tickets that you helped me to avoid, and so forth. But one of the best stories that I heard was about a year ago. Someone came to me and said, thank you, you saved my marriage. And I said, what? He said, well, because of Waze, we don't argue anymore in the car, so you saved my marriage. And for a while, that was the best story I ever heard until, and I have 5 children, and one of them is 20 years old, and he really likes to drive. If he would actually need to go to the kitchen, he would drive there, right? And so one day I asked him to drive me to the airport, and he said, my phone is broken, I can't. And I said, what? Here's the car, here are the keys, drive me to the airport, right? And he said, my phone is broken, I don't know how to get there. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna be in the car with you, and I'll tell you how to get there. And then he asked me, and how would I come back? So when this happens, you realize that you lose orientation, and this is part of the changes that happens throughout the journey. And when this happens, you know that you've changed the world. I would add to that only one observation, which is critical to understand the pace of innovation. So we started Waze in 2007, and we actually launched the company only in 2008. A decade ago, right? The first version was running on a PDA. Okay, PDA, remember? Long time ago, there were PDAs, things like that completely disappeared out of the market. And then the next version was on Nokia phone. And today, everything is on iPhone and Android now. If I would come here again 10 years from now, I will need to remind you that we used to have iPhones and Android phones. This is how fast change has happened. 10 years ago, that's it, right? So there was no iPhone, right? Facebook was just a little small, tiny thing that no one believed that it's going to take off. And Uber was not even there. I think that there is someone here from Uber, right? Or at least there was a tag name with Uber on it. Uber was not even here, right? And so many things were not even here. And when you start to think about, so what's going to happen in the next decade, the pace of innovation increases. Right? So you look at the top 10 companies in the world today, 5 of them will not be on that list 10 years from now. Now, we don't know which one of the 5, right? If we would know who the 5 are, we will sell short, right? This is exactly what we're going to do. But we don't know that. The more interesting part is who is going to replace them in the top 10 companies. And some of those do not even exist today. Now, what I want you to think just for a second, not about your own business, about your own market, and try to imagine this market 10 years from now and ask yourself, what dramatic changes might happen that will make my business irrelevant 10 years from now? Now, at the end of the day, and this is, I'm kind of speeding up to the end of the presentation. What we really need to know is we need to have this observation and tell ourselves, if this is where the market is going, what I'm currently doing might not be relevant in 10 years from now. And how do I get from here to there is actually through investing in disruptive companies that their business model is so much dramatically different than what we are doing today. So hopefully that will work. And this is me. And by the way, this is my email. I do answer all of my emails eventually. So usually I have long flights, and usually because I fly a lot. So during flights I answer all of them. And so if you'll reach out to me, then I will answer. And this is me, or at least a thinner version of me in the picture. And I'm an entrepreneur. I build startups, and usually I'm looking for big problems that are worth solving, and I will then build a team to actually go and address those. And what I'm trying to do is bigger impact. I'm trying to change the world. I'm trying to make it a better place for all of us. And here are my startups, and I will quickly review them. So Waze, we are familiar with. Move It is like Waze, but for public transportation, actually answering the same question that Waze does. How do I get from here to wherever I want to go right now, but using public transportation? Even more important than Waze, because there are more people using public transportation. This is essentially the real solution for traffic jams. And it's growing faster than Waze. So this is definitely part of the revolution that I'm trying to do. FIEX deals with the biggest secret in the world, financial fees. Anyone here from the financial sector? Okay. So in the US alone, right, $600 billion of financial fees every year, 600 billion. You compare that, this is a GDP of an average country, right? So this is really a lot of money. And the scary part is that people don't even know that they're paying them. And when I was young, my dad once told me that if you don't know how much you're paying, then you're paying too much. Now, financial industry is one of the industries that is actually due to multiple disruptions, and I will show some examples of how you can change the underlying assumptions that we have, and as a result, change the entire market. For example, people don't change their financial service provider, right? Well, that's us, right? I still have the same bank account that I opened when I was 16 years old, right? And I'm no longer 16 years old. But when you look at my kids, they don't even know where their bank account is. They don't even know where the branch is. They don't even know that there is a branch, right? For them, it's only there is a mobile app and this is the bank, right? And so very different underlying assumptions that we have, but if you change those, the market will change. Transparency, by the way, is what FX does, is create transparency in the market. When people realize that if you have 1% a year on your retirement plan, this is going to accumulate into 1/3 of your lifetime saving. So this is a lot of money. And when people realize that, they're starting to take actions. Rumor is a marketplace for non-refundable hotel reservation. Just imagine that you're making travel plans, you're making hotel reservation, you change your plans and you get stuck with reservations that you cannot use. Simply sell the reservation to someone else. Anyone here from the hotel industry? So if you would be in the hotel industry, you would know that your 30% of your revenues are actually coming from incidentals, right? It's food and beverages and internet and additional stuff. So as a business model, you prefer occupancy versus vacancy. And if someone else is actually going to do that for you, do the heavy lifting for you, you're very pleased with that. So this is Rumor. Zik is another marketplace for store credit and gift cards, essentially for branded currency. So just imagine that you go to Marks and Spencer, you buy something, and then you return that to the store. You get a gift card or a store credit that you can use within the chain. 30% of those never being used. 30%. Now you look throughout Europe, this is 100 billion euros a year of real money that no one is using, right? And when you enable marketplace in general, enable liquidity of underutilized resources. And when you do that, you increase efficiency in the market. NG deals with the frustrations of going to the mechanic. If I take my car to the mechanic, whatever they'll say, I'll say okay, because I have no clue, right? So if they will, the mechanic, will call me up and say, you need to replace the carburetor in your car, then I would say, okay, then replace the carburetor in my car, right? Except the fact that there is no carburetor in my car. They don't make cars with carburetors for 2 decades now. And so NG is an app running on the smartphones, connects to the car computer, doing the diagnostics for me, telling me what's wrong, and then asking mechanic around me to quote to repair that. And this becomes pretty powerful because we're speaking about disruption, right? So this market is a market that I cannot do price comparison. With NG, you can do price comparison. The thing that actually creates the disruption in the market is the price comparison. And there is nothing like price comparison to keep everyone honest. And there are more, I'll skip some of those. But I will keep on building them. I'll build, if I will be here next year and we will have the same meeting, then this list is going to be even longer. And maybe I will remember that I told you about some and I'll tell you about the others. So I want a different perspective about disruption. So disruption is not about technology. It's about changing market equilibrium. It's about changing the way we are doing business. And it might be because of new technology that leads into a new product, and because of that we change behavior. Maybe it's new price, right? Waze was free. Now we don't think about it anymore because all the navigation services are free, right? So it doesn't matter if this is Google Maps or Apple Maps or Waze or whatever, they're all free. But when we introduced our model, we actually played unfair at the common ground where everyone else was unable to play, except those that have a indefinite amount of money and can play. And we did it through a different model, through crowdsourcing, right? And so our cost structure was so much different than anyone else, and you can basically say, you can have higher profit, or you can play a different ball game and keeps everyone else out of the business. So this is price. Maybe it's a different business model. Maybe something that we used to buy up until now, and from now on we can rent, and all of a sudden you change the behavior, right? Maybe we enable information and knowledge, new knowledge that is being introduced to the market, and this is the one that actually creates changes either in the demand or in the supply. And when you enable that, then you actually have new market equilibrium. Now, disruptors, they are newcomers. They always newcomers. Existing business do not disrupt their own market. And we want to think about it that we can actually explain that and rationalize that, and we're basically saying, okay, so if you're providing something for fee and now you're going to provide that for free, then where are the revenues going to come next year, right? And so this is pretty challenging. This is not the real reason. The real reason is that for organization, in order to disrupt, they need to tell themselves, this is our trajectory, the market is going that way, what we are doing is wrong. And we as people have very hard time to tell ourselves that we are wrong. Very hard time. Now, even if we, within the organization, will understand that at the top level, and we will try to push that understanding down to different levels, then within the organization, we will have people that in the current trajectory, they think of themselves as experts. In the new trajectory, they might become irrelevant, and they will push back. Now, I don't know if you've tried that, and if you're running a business and you've tried to suggest or drive the organization to actually do major change. Organizations push back. And at the end of the day, it's very hard for us as decision maker to actually enforce something like that. We can bypass that through a different approach. But if you're a CEO of a company and you basically realize that this is where the market is going and the current path is that way, and you need to do something dramatic in order to do that, or the market is actually going to go through a disruption, and you basically say we need to do something significant, you don't know, but you are most likely going to face pushback from the organization. Now, this is not the M&A guys that will tell you no. This is the head of business unit that basically the major issue will be about ego management. So just imagine for a second, Google acquires Waze, right? There is a head of geo for Google, and Larry comes on top and tell him, you need to acquire Waze because they're doing a better job than you. How exactly do you feel when this happens, right? And so it's always about ego management. So disruptors are those that have nothing to lose, and this is very, very important. It's not necessarily newcomers. It could be, it's always newcomers, but not necessarily entrepreneurs, right? Maybe it's a European company moving into the US market and basically introduce completely different business model over there because they have nothing to lose. When you have nothing to lose, you can actually play different than the rest of the market. When you have too much to lose, you will find out that it's very, very hard to play different. Some markets that are calling for disruption, if there is lack of transparency in the market, if people don't know, right? If your business is based on secrets, then someone is going to reveal those secrets and make them public knowledge, and your underlying assumption that this is good enough is not sustainable. Markets with a middleman, that's clear indications of inefficiency of the market. Right? Market where there is major difference between the price that you pay and the value that you get. So if no one knows, then it's okay. Markets where the business model is inherently wrong. Any lawyers in the room? Okay, so take the legal market, right? In general, lawyers charge you by the hour, right? So their business incentive is actually waste your time. Spend more time of them on the business, and dealing with the legal stuff in order to actually get paid more. Now, just change the model for a second, right? And basically tell them, you know what, I'll pay you whatever you want. You don't need to actually accumulate all these hours. I'll pay you that amount of money. Then they're not going to waste your time anymore. In many markets where there are regulations, and the regulation doesn't work, right? So, tourists from outside of the European Union coming to Europe, we actually entitled to get the VAT back. Yeah, but 95% of the cases, people fail to get that. By the way, this is one of the startups that they didn't review is Refundit that is doing exactly that. And many of those, I would run into the problem. I'll figure out that this is not how it should be and build the startup to deal with that. Let's keep some of those. This is very, very important. We want to think that we understand disruption, right? And if we are in the position like the blockbuster CEO, that there is a CEO of a startup coming to your office, and the name of the startup was Netflix. And the CEO tells you, the Netflix CEO tells the blockbuster CEO, please acquire me. And then you speak about the price and it's $50 million. The blockbuster CEO said no, twice, right? 2 opportunity. And when you look at it today and we say, you know, that was an absolutely stupid decision, right? Not necessarily. That was the most likely decision. Because in order to make the opposite decision, what you need to tell yourself is what I'm doing is wrong. What they're doing is right. And this is very, very hard thing to do. Now, to a certain extent, in many cases, even if the CEO would realize that the market, the current trajectory of the market, not of the current business, is that what they're doing is going to become irrelevant, even though that they would understand that, it might be nearly impossible to actually have the organization follow that path. Microsoft, on the iPhone, right? This is not going to take off, right? Digital camera. Who invented digital camera? That was actually Kodak, right? They invented that in their lab. So they tried to actually have built-in internal innovation being built in. And when they did that, they called the CEO and showed them what exactly they did. And he said, shh, don't tell anyone, right? So he actually was the first, his company was the first one to understand the disruptive effect of what they're exactly doing. And they didn't want to actually take that path. Now, obviously, if you just for a second go back to 1976 and be the CEO of Kodak and your business is selling paper, that's your business. Then if someone will come to you telling you, you know what, this business is going to be irrelevant in the future, it's very scary. There are, other stories. Google and Yahoo. The story is that in 1997, Google was actually the search engine for Yahoo for a little while. And then they ran out of cash before Sequoia invested, and they approached Yahoo and asked Yahoo to acquire them for $2 million. $2 million, right? And Yahoo said no. But there are tons of missed opportunities. The other side of disruption is that disruption is always good. By definition, it's good. Now, because if we're saying that disruption is about changing market equilibrium, and this is where the market is today, the new equilibrium is by definition better, because otherwise the market will simply not go there, right? That's the power of market, of demand and supply, right? You take Uber, for example, and you ask yourself, so what have changed? There are 10 times more on-demand trips today than there were 10 years ago, right? So the entire market is 10 times bigger. Obviously, Uber took part of it, taxi stations took part of it, other applications took another part of it, but the entire market is much bigger. Some of the underlying assumptions, and I tap into financial industry, but I will go into mobility industry, and you'll name your industry, and I'll show you with a different approach how you can disrupt the market. Actually, to a certain extent, you can do that yourself, right? So just imagine that you quit from your current position and you want to disrupt your entire market, the existing market that you're in. You actually know what to do. Now, if someone else is going to do the same thing, they'll probably have the right path. And they'll probably figure it out, what exactly needs to be done in order to change the trajectory of the market. And so in many markets, it's very easy to understand disruption, right? You take underlying assumptions of financial industry, for example, that people don't change. They do change. And things are starting to show up differently. Just imagine life insurance, right? The standard model for life insurance in the US called term life insurance, in which people in general, they have a specific amount of the insurance to be paid in case they will drop dead, right? So this is very simple insurance, right? You bring me the body, you get money, right? No body, no money, right? Very simple. But the thing is that this is for a specific term, for a specific period of time, right? So usually, let's say $1 million term life insurance for 20 years, If you drop that during any time during these 20 years, then your family will get $1 million. If this happened tomorrow, $1 million. If this happens in 10 years, $1 million. If this happens in 19 years and 364 days, $1 million. A day after, zero. Now, if you agree that you don't need, after 20 years, you don't need life insurance, then it's very unlikely that you need one day before that a coverage of $1 million. What you actually do need is some sort of a declining life insurance, right? Because the more time going by, the kids become older, they might be at college already, and we don't need to take care of them. Maybe your liabilities about the house and so forth are actually, they're gone. Maybe you have accumulated enough wealth. You don't need $1 million coverage after 19 years. And so the right approach is actually to offer some sort of a declining life insurance, right? So you start with $1 million coverage on the first year, and year after year, this number will be declining until it reaches close to zero, which is happening anyhow. Now, why doesn't anyone offer this service? There's less premium in that, right? About half, maybe even less than half. So no one wants to offer something that is going to generate less revenues for them. But what's going to happen if a European insurance company will move into the US, and that's the only thing that they offer, and they actually charge half of the current premiums that are available in the market? They are going to capture the market. Very easy, right? So very hard to execute, but conceptually very easy to understand how we can disrupt the market. Think about asset management, right? Today we know that in asset management, you charge your customers AUM based, right? So depending how much money you have, you pay 1% of that or whatever percentage of that on an annual basis. What if someone is going to introduce a flat fee asset management model? Then essentially we understand that the first people to move from the old model to the new model are actually the wealthiest people, the people that have a lot of money, and the saving for them is going to be much more dramatic. Now, if this is the case, what happened in the previous market, in the old model? The old model relies on a lot of money, but a lot of money is actually moving to the new model. And so you can disrupt markets easily. Car industry as a model, right? So this industry did not change in the last 100 years. And you can look at it from different perspectives, right? The simplest one is to basically ask yourself, so what was the most sellable car in America 100 years ago? And that was Ford, and it was black, and it was doing about 16 miles per gallon. And today, last year, it was Ford, it was black, and it was doing about 17 miles per gallon, right? So nothing dramatic changed. But when you think about it from a different perspective, you go to your car, you open the driver door, you sit down, you have a steering wheel, you have pedals, and you drive the car yourself, the same way that our parents did. With the technology that enable autonomous vehicles, this is going to change. Just imagine for a second that the cars can drive by themselves, right? And so they don't need a driver. And if you want to get someplace, you have a clicker. You click on the clicker, a car shows up. And you tell the car, take me wherever, right? And then you click on the clicker again, and the car disappears. If this is the case, I don't need to own a car. I need to own a clicker. And maybe I want to have a regular clicker for everyday car, and a big clicker for a big car, and a red clicker for a red car. I don't need to own a car. So the demand of the market is going to change from consuming products into consuming service. Now, if this is the case, there are a few things that are going to happen. Number one, the overall demand for mobility is going to go up dramatically, right? Because it's much more affordable for many more people. And so the overall mileage being driven in the market is going to increase. The number of vehicles sold in the market is going to decrease dramatically. Now, if you're a car maker and your business is selling cars and this one is going to decrease, if you don't switch to the new model, you will be out of business. Now, you ask the CEO of the car industry if they realize that, and the answer is yes. You go one level below, and the only thing that they care about is how many cars we are selling this quarter. And what is the threat? that the competitor will sell one car more. So you look longer period of time and you realize that this might be irrelevant. You look at the actions that you're taking, it's not enough. Now, this is just an example, but a derivative of that is that there are so many markets that will be disrupted. So what if you have a driving school? Sell that today, right? Next generation, they're not going to drive. So obviously, they're not even going to have even a driver license. So if this is your business, sell that, right? If you can sell that today, then do that today, because it's not going to be relevant in 10 years from now. If you're selling car insurance, if you have parking garage in the middle of the city, these cars, autonomous vehicles, they're not going to park, right? It's cheaper for them to actually keep on going in circles rather than to park someplace and pay £5 per hour or whatever it is. Or they might go outside of the city and wait there, and then you call them and they're coming back. What if you're selling car insurance? This is very important to understand, right? Your model now today is based on the number of vehicles sold, because you're selling insurance per vehicle. This number is going to go down. The future model is going to be based on usage. If you don't switch to this model, you're going to lose money. If you will switch, if you'll be the first one to switch, you're going to capture more market share than anyone else. And so the entire car insurance industry have to go towards usage-based insurance, right? Or user-based insurance, or whatever it is. I'll skip some of those. So Uber guy is not here, right? Disrupt the disruptor. So I want you to imagine a 100-pound Uber trip, right? And what's the breakdown of this 100 pound? 60% is the driver wages, right? 20%, so 20 pound, is the cost of operating the vehicle. Total cost of ownership of the vehicle, right? So including financing, including insurance, everything. And Uber as a marketplace have commission as a marketplace, which is maybe 20%. Now you take away from this equation the driver, and three things happens. Number one, the cost of this trip becomes 25 pounds and not 100 pounds, which is very dramatic. Cost of operation remains about the same. Commission for the marketplace is about 20%. There is no cost of the driver, 25 pounds, that's the cost. So we realize that. As a result, three things are actually risking the future of Uber. And Uber is just an example, right? That will be Lyft, that will be taxi drivers, that will be anyone that this is their business. So the first one is that your revenues are actually at risk, right? They are at risk because today you get per trip 20 pounds and you're going to get 4 or 5 pounds per trip. So this is one thing that you need to take into consideration. This is very likely not to actually hurt you because the volume is probably going to be 10x bigger. The assets that you have today become irrelevant, right? So today Uber is the market leader because they actually have critical mass of drivers in multiple markets. But if drivers are irrelevant, then what's the use of having critical mass of assets that are irrelevant? So this is one thing. The other thing is that you would claim that they understand the demand. They understand the demand of a 100-pound trip, so private trips. The new trips are at 25. This is public transportation level of pricing. They don't necessarily understand the demand for that. And so when you take those, when you realize that these are going to happen, then you start to ask yourself, so what is their strategy, right? And you have to deal with the biggest threat of your relevancy. I'm going to skip the traffic problem. I'll just give you a glance, so not the solution, but just I look at it from a very different perspective, right? So we started Waze 10 years ago with the mindset that we're going to help drivers to avoid traffic jam. So this is 10 years ago. You look at traffic jams today and they are bigger and more severe than they were 10 years ago. And so I haven't solved the problem yet. But I'm now taking a different approach and looking at traffic as a major issue and trying to address that differently. And there is a different underlying assumptions for each one of us as a consumer to actually consume mobility, right? So we're looking at two things, mobility and ego. Right? And utility, we're looking at it as time, cost, and convenience, right? And if you make those better, then there are more people that will choose a different alternatives than driving their cars. We already know that convenience of driving a car is not that convenient anymore because you actually have to remain focused on driving the vehicle, right? So you cannot work, you cannot watch movies, you cannot write the newspaper. There are many other things that you can actually do if you are sitting in the back of a car, or you are in a bus, or you are in a train. And so convenience, we understand that easily. You can actually deal with the speed and with the price to the level that will make it a better choice for many of us. So just the approach, this is traffic jams, right? And this is actually 5 lanes of traffic jams. And when we think of traffic jams, this is what we have in our mind. Actually, what we have here is 200 people in 177 vehicles. I'm going to do a little bit of a magic, and I am going to remove the cars and leave the drivers in place, right? This is what we have here. 177 people occupying so much space on the road. I can actually fit those people into 3 buses. So obviously, the biggest challenge of traffic is the ratio between passengers and vehicles. Now, we can also claim that we might change that based on the size of the vehicles, right? So if instead of having big cars, that the purpose of the big car is actually protect ourselves. And we also need to keep additional distance between the car ahead of us and the cars on the sides in order to protect the car themselves. If we don't need all that, then we might be driving in a wheelchair, right, which is much smaller, and then we can actually fit much more people into the existing infrastructure. But if this is not the case, then we need to change the ratio of number of passengers per vehicle. And the only way to do that is through public transportation or carpool, because nothing else is going to change that. By the way, if you start to think about autonomous vehicle, okay, so this is going to be the solution. Just imagine that there will be 500 cars carrying 200 people. There will be cars, empty cars, that are driving by themselves, looking for someone to bring them and take them someplace as well. There are many other markets that will be affected if this is the trajectory, right? So just imagine that you have a store in the middle of the city. You don't need a store. You need a car that will drive to different places and actually do the delivery. So the entire commerce market might be affected because of the cost of mobility is becoming so low. So I'm going to skip that and want for a second to give you maybe a thought how to think about disruption. So just for a second, take off your hat as running a business and imagine that you're an entrepreneur and your mission is actually change the way you're doing business. Go and disrupt your existing market. So you build a new company, you start from scratch, and your vision is to disrupt that market. What would you do? How would you think about that? Now, obviously, we already established the underlying assumptions that organizations cannot change their own trajectory, cannot change in general. They have very hard time to change, but they cannot disrupt their own market. If someone will come to you and tell you this is what they're going to do, you know they're right. You know that they're going into the right direction. And if this is the case, then you actually need to invest in that. Now, what you need to think of is not what type of acquisition I'm going to do in order to increase my business for next year. What type of acquisition I need to do or what type of investment I need to do in order to remain relevant 5 or 10 years down the road. If you don't think about that today, by the time you'll figure that out, it's actually going to be too expensive for you. You are very unlikely to be able to do that. But when you think about it, and you always ask yourself, my long-term investment in M&A strategy is not about increasing my business, it's about protecting my relevancy, then you actually have a different approach. To a certain extent, here are Deloitte people that might be helping you to do acquisitions and things like that. As a business, give Deloitte money to build a venture to invest in disruptive companies to your industry and become all LP in what they're actually doing in all of those investments. And when you do that, you actually have the hedging, right? So if this disruption company is right, you actually have the hedge to move to the new market. If they're wrong, no one cares, right? This is going to be a small amount of money that needs to be invested in order to find that out. If you will try to disrupt your own, you might be able to do that as a separate entity, but then it's very hard to manage. Just imagine, you are the CEO, you're telling yourself, okay, what we are doing is actually wrong, I need to build something else, something new. I'm going to build that on the side because I know that my organization is unable of actually executing that. And then, what do you tell the rest of the organization? That this is the future? And what exactly are we? It's very challenging to be in that position. Nearly impossible. Nearly the only way for you to do that is actually have multiple bets on disruptive startups or disruptive companies that are basically saying your underlying assumptions of the market are wrong. And you think that they are right with these underlying assumptions. You cannot stop a revolution. This is going to happen, right? So if you think that you are going to acquire someone that is disrupting your market and shut them down, you just indicated the rest of the market that this is awesome things to do, right? The same entrepreneurs, you shut them down, they will start all over again because they know you're right. So just a little bit of observations of M&A. And I would start with just a little bit about the Waze acquisition. And Google is probably the most amazing acquirer, right? Because when you start to think about M&A, you ask yourself, so I'm the acquirer, right? So I'm the buying company. How do I integrate the new company? Now you have very different DNA. Whatever the DNA that you have, if you're acquiring a startup company, they have completely different DNA. Actually, what the founders are thinking of is, you'll ask all the entrepreneurs that you run into in your lifetime what they're going to do after this startup. It's always the same answers, right? I'm going to build another startup. And in most cases, they actually know what the next startup is all about, right? And so you acquire them, and what they have in their mind is that initially they're going to focus on making the integration work because they want to see the dream come through. And then the next phase is that they're going to look for someone to replace them. And you actually like that because you think that, okay, now they give me a way into the company and I can actually have my trusted manager to run this new business unit that they just acquired, right? And then a year later, they're already building their next startup. They have different mindset than the existing organization, the existing buying organization. So it's the mix of culture that is the best, is the bigger challenge or the biggest challenge for the integration. Now, in many cases, if you are Google, you're not even trying to integrate that. You basically say, I'm buying this company because they're doing a good job, right? If they're doing a good job, then don't touch it, right? You can only break it. And so that was the case with YouTube before, and we had this as a role model when Google approached us. And Waze is still independent, right? And you ask yourself, but there is Google Maps and there is Waze, and they're actually somewhat competing products, and they're still two products. And I don't know if you have followed the press back then, but the Israeli newspapers have a double spread article about Apple acquiring Waze at the end of 2012. And when you read the article, it looks so real, right? To the level that there are details on the deal, except the fact that we never spoke with Apple There was not even a dialogue, not even a single dialogue with Apple. But it didn't, at the end of the day, you read the details and you figure out that, okay, where exactly it's coming from. And no one knew. What we did have is actually an offer from Google at the end of 2012 that we said no. And really, in order to get the deal that you want, you need to say no to the deal that you don't want. And then later on, Facebook was actually gave us a proposal to acquire us, and only then Google came back with a proposal that was 1 page long. That's it, 1 page long offer. And the last line of this offer was that we can close the deal in 1 week. And it took them 10 days to close the deal. Now, the reason that they acquired and was the opposite of the reason why we said yes, right? So at the time, there were actually only 2 good driving applications that were free, right? Waze and Google Maps. And we thought that Google is doing a much better job than we do. And they're moving faster and increasing faster, and they have indefinite resources that they can invest in that. What Google saw is that Waze is actually doing a better job than them. And an average Waze user is using the application so much more frequent than an average Google Maps user. And they decided to acquire because we did a better job. And they put the offer on the table, we said yes, and that was relatively very easy decision to be made. And the reason is that, when you try to acquire a company, and in particular, if you're not that experienced in acquiring companies, then you only think about your own perspective. You don't think about the entrepreneurs or the startup perspective. And this is the one perspective that is actually going to determine whether or not the deal is going to be successful or not. So the buyer perspective, the most important thing is the ego management. Right? So you're CEO, you tell the head of business unit, go and buy this stuff, this company, right? And you have the supportive infrastructure to do that. So you have head of M&A, and you have corporate development, and you have all the different service providers to the acquisition. You have them available for this guy, the head of the business unit. What happens at the head of the head of the business unit? Right? What do they think about? So I'm here, I'm running this business unit. Now I need to acquire this company. Who is going to run the business unit the day after? Is that me? Or is that the CEO of this organization? Right? This is their biggest concern. And only once this concern is being satisfied, they actually like the acquisition. Because then, if this goes underneath, then they might have a bigger organization, bigger influence, bigger deal, right? And then it makes sense. But if this one is not satisfied, if they don't know for sure that they are going to run the new organization, they are going to object. They are going to find a long list of excuses why it will never work. And by the way, they're right, it will never work. If they actually want that to work, if their ego is being satisfied, then they want that to work, and they will make the effort to try to make it work. They're still not the only one in the equation. So ego and politics. Ego, what happens to the CEO? Politics, what happened to the rest of the management? That is going to determine whether or not the acquisition is going to happen or not, and whether or not it's going to be successful or not. Because if the mindset of the buying organization that they are being forced to acquire someone, what they really want to do in their ego is show you that that was the wrong decision. And they will make it the wrong decision in that sense. What happens at the head of the company that is being bought, right? What happens to the entrepreneurs there or to the CEO there? It's personal, it's ego, it's the future. The only 3 things that they care about, right? So the personal is how much money do I gonna get out of the deal, right? And at the end of the day, in negotiation, there is a zero-sum game between ego and money, right? The more ego that you get, the less money that you can pay, and vice versa, right? So this is maybe a very, very important thing to realize when you're negotiating a deal. If you are looking for the ego, then you'll pay a higher price. right? And the other side will actually get more money. If they're looking for the ego, then you satisfy their ego and you pay lower price. So the personal outcome is the most critical things to determine whether or not the organization or the startup wants to be acquired. And then it's the ego. So what's going to happen the day after? And by the way, this is one of the areas that it's relatively easy, right? Because I left the day after the acquisition. For me, it was not important to stay. I actually wanted to build new startups. And so you don't know up front whether or not they want to stay and become the head of the new buying organization or they want to leave, right? And this is very personal. In the future. So entrepreneurs have a dream, right? They build a startup with a dream, and the dream is valid. And so if you satisfy that part of it, and you're basically saying, you know what, with the new organization, we're going to satisfy the dream even better, then they're going to support that. If you tell them, I'm going to buy what you have, integrate it into my new product, and whatever you've built, the name and the recognition and the reputation that you have built is going to disappear, then we are back into the ego issue. And so the future is actually the story that they tell themselves in order to justify the deal, to justify their ego. The other part of it is that what we need to remember is that M&A in general is a very competitive market, right? If you look at a specific company and you tell yourself, you know what, they are disrupting the industry, they are the market leader, I want to acquire them so I can actually lead the change in the market, you're not the only one that thinks that way. Nearly all of your competitors would see the same picture. And not only that, if you would approach the company and say, you know what, I would like to acquire you, the second after, they're going to run to all of your competitors and basically start a bidding contest, right? Because they are trying to satisfy the outcome and the ego. And so this is very, very competitive market. You will be in a much better position in this market if you actually have heads up and visibility into those companies that you might want to acquire, right? If you have an equity position because you invested early, if you are doing with them business, then you have a much better likelihood of being the acquirer. But this is very, very competitive market, and a lot of fear of missing out, a lot of pressures that is not necessarily realistic, right? So if something happens and your competitor is buying a company, you feel the urgency to actually buy a company as a response to that, as a reactive response, not necessarily proactive response. And so a lot of triggering happens not because you think this is the right thing to do, but because you actually have no choice. The most important things about integration is that if it's working, don't touch it. That's, every engineer, they learn that the first day, right? If it ain't broken, don't fix it.